It is a Tuesday evening. The halls of the fourth-floor private wing of Albrecht Memorial Hospital are quiet in the way hospitals get quiet after visiting hours, that particular stillness, where the only sounds are the soft rubber soles of nurses on linoleum and the distant hum of machines doing the work that bodies have temporarily refused to do. In room 412, the oxygen monitor sings its small, steady song. 17 beats a minute, consistent, stubborn, alive. A man stands at the door. He is well dressed. His blazer fits the way expensive things fit, without effort, without announcement. He holds his phone in his left hand with the screen angled slightly away from the nurse passing behind him. He nods at her. He smiles. It is the smile of a man who has practiced being appropriate in difficult situations. And it works, because the nurse smiles back and keeps walking, and now the hallway belongs to him. He steps inside. He closes the door. He does not go to his wife's bedside first. He goes to the window, checks the view, checks the reflection, the way a man checks an exit before he commits to an entrance. Then he turns. He looks at the woman in the bed, at the oxygen monitor, at the tangle of tubes and equipment and soft green light from the display screen. He looks at the primary power connection panel on the wall beside the bed. He walks toward it. His wife is completely still. She has been completely still for 11 days. The doctors have written in her chart that she is unresponsive, that there is no voluntary movement detected, that the prognosis is poor. What the doctors have not written, what they do not know, what they cannot know, is that the woman in that bed is awake. Not awake the way you and I are awake right now, able to move, to speak, to reach out a hand and change the direction of what is happening. This is a different kind of awake entirely. Her mind is a roaring fire inside a glass case that has been sealed from the outside. She can think, she can feel, she can hear every footstep, every whispered word, every click of a door closing, and every pause that comes before a decision is made. She can hear her husband walking toward the wall panel beside her bed. She cannot move a single muscle to stop him. His hand reaches for the cord. And this, right here, is where this story begins. Not with the moment she collapsed. Not with the wedding he is already planning while she lies in that bed. Not with the empire he knows nothing about. This story begins with a woman who had already decided, from inside a body that refused to answer her, that she was not going to let him win. Whatever you do, do not go anywhere. Before we go any further into this story, if this opening already has your heart hammering, I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button. Subscribe to Mr. Black Love Drama TV if you are not already part of this family, and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from tonight. Are you in Atlanta, Houston, London, Lagos, Johannesburg, Accra, Toronto, or somewhere else entirely? We want to know exactly who is writing this story out to the very end, because what is coming will stay with you. Now let us go back to the beginning, because to understand what happened in that hospital room, you need to understand who Nadia Amara Ferris really was. Most people who walked past Nadia on the street would not have looked twice. That was not an accident. She dressed simply, not cheaply, but without performance. She drove a car that was reliable and clean and entirely forgettable. She arrived at restaurants without reservations under any name that would cause a reaction. She moved through the city the way certain rivers move through a landscape, quietly, without apparent urgency, and yet shaping everything around them in ways that only become visible once you look at the map from above. Nadia Amara Osei had built her first company at 27 from a rented workspace, a second-hand laptop, and a business plan she had rewritten 11 times before she believed it was ready. The company was a logistics architecture firm, which sounds technical because it was, but the simplest way to understand it is this. She solved the problem of how large things move between places in ways that cost less, waste less, and arrive more reliably. She was extraordinary at it. By the time she was 30, the firm had grown into something that moved cargo across 4 continents and employed hundreds of people who had no idea that their company was run by a woman who still made her own coffee every morning and answered her own phone when Solomon called. Solomon Vrate had been her financial architect for 9 years. He was meticulous, brilliant, and one of the very few people on earth who knew the full picture of what Nadia had built. He once described working with her as watching someone play a chess game where they had already seen the board 20 moves ahead and were simply being gracious enough to let everyone else catch up. When Nadia sold the majority stake in the logistics firm at 31, she did it quietly. No press release, No Forbes profile, no announcement of any kind. The figure involved made her accountant sit down and stay seated for a full minute, but Nadia herself had moved on before the ink was dry. The proceeds went into something she had been incubating for 2 years already. A network of holdings, real estate, a biosciences fund, a healthcare trust, a technology investment group. She called the parent structure Osei Meridian. She registered it under a name that could not be traced back to her without significant effort and significant time. She told almost no one. To the outside world, she was a woman who had done reasonably well, a comfortable apartment in a good neighborhood, a social life that was warm but not excessive, a reputation among the people who actually knew her as someone precise and principled and slightly impossible to fully read. To Solomon, she was the most disciplined mind he had ever encountered. To the city, she was essentially invisible. She had a philosophy about this that she stated only once in a private conversation with Solomon, and that he never forgot. Visible things get picked apart. Invisible things just keep growing. She was 34 years old, and her invisible empire was still growing when she walked into a gallery opening on a Thursday evening and met Julian Ferris. He was handsome in the way that men are handsome when they have spent considerable energy curating every visible aspect of themselves. Angular face, good posture, the particular ease of someone accustomed to being the most compelling person in a room and comfortable with that being noticed. He was a corporate strategist, he told her. He worked with family-owned enterprises on expansion and succession planning. He was articulate and engaged, and he asked her questions about herself with what felt like genuine curiosity. Nadia, who could read a room the way most people read a sentence, watched him carefully for the first 20 minutes. Then she made a decision that would cost her more than anything she had ever paid for. She let herself be found, not the real her. Not yet. She told him she consulted independently. She mentioned the apartment. She said nothing about Osei Meridian, nothing about the biosciences fund, nothing about the holding network that was, at that precise moment, quietly reshaping 3 different industry sectors. She wanted, for the first time in her adult life, something that could not be bought or structured or planned. She wanted to know what it felt like to be chosen for nothing more than herself. Julian chose her. He was attentive in the early months. He remembered details. He knew her ring size before he proposed. He knew she preferred understated elegance. He knew she disliked yellow gold and overlit restaurants and conversations that stayed on the surface too long. She watched him pay attention and told herself that attention was evidence of love. She was wrong. Attention and love are entirely different things. One is a skill. The other is a choice made every single day. Nadia, who could calculate risk in her sleep, had miscalculated the most important variable. She married him on a Saturday in late October, in a small ceremony with peonies and ranunculus in soft blush tones, because she had specifically requested those and the florist had understood immediately, and Julian had not noticed either way. She filed that detail away. She did not examine it. The first year of marriage was pleasant in the way that shared spaces can be pleasant when 2 people are still performing the best version of themselves. The second year was fine, functional, warm on the surface and slightly hollow underneath, the way a beautiful building can look perfect from the street and have serious structural problems in the foundation that only become visible once you know where to look. Julian had not anticipated what it would feel like to live beside a woman like Nadia on an ongoing basis. She asked sharp questions. She solved problems before he could offer to help with them. She saw through people with an accuracy that unnerved him, not because she announced what she saw, but because her eyes would shift in a particular way that told him she had already understood something he hadn't, and she was simply deciding whether to say it aloud. She never begged for anything. She never escalated. She never gave him the satisfaction of losing her composure. She was, without any intention of being so, the more formidable person in every room they shared. And Julian Ferris, who had spent his entire adult life arranging himself into the most important person in any given space, began to feel something he was not equipped to name and therefore converted into something easier. He began to resent her, not for what she did, for what she made him feel about himself. He started looking for rooms where the dynamic was different. He found one at a fundraising gala in the spring of their 3rd year. Her name was Isolde Bramwell. Her family had founded a textile empire 3 generations back. She wore her wealth the way certain people wear a signature scent, invisible but impossible to ignore once you are close enough to notice. She looked at Julian with the particular hunger of a woman who recognizes a man who wants something she has and is willing to offer the transaction. They were perfectly matched in their ambitions. Nadia read the pattern before Julian said a single word about it. She recognized the slightly angled phone screen, the new interest in events she was not invited to, the flatness in his eyes when she reached for his hand in public, that barely perceptible withdrawal that most spouses would rationalize away. Nadia did not rationalize. She was deciding what to do about it when the aneurysm happened. She had been walking to her car in the parking structure beneath their building. It was a Wednesday afternoon. She remembers the sound of her own footsteps on the concrete, and then she does not remember anything until she woke up somewhere that was not the parking structure, somewhere that was entirely dark and entirely loud inside her own head, and entirely, terrifyingly still in every direction she tried to reach with a muscle that refused to answer. The medical term is locked-in syndrome. In simple terms, it is a neurological condition in which a person retains full consciousness and full cognitive function, but loses the ability to move or speak because of complete paralysis of nearly all voluntary muscles. The person is awake, they are thinking, they are feeling everything. They can often still move their eyes, which is the only outward sign that anyone is home at all. Locked-in syndrome is frequently misdiagnosed as a vegetative state, which means that patients have been dismissed, neglected, undertreated, and in documented cases, have had life support removed while they were fully aware and completely unable to communicate that awareness. It is one of the most frightening experiences a human being can survive. For Nadia, day one inside her locked body was confusion. She did not understand what was happening. She could hear the machines. She could hear voices. She could feel the bed beneath her. She simply could not respond. Day 3 was terror. Pure, absolute, wordless terror of the kind that has no outlet, no expression, no release, because the only body she had was no longer taking her calls. Day 7 was something different. By day 7, the terror had not left, but something colder and more purposeful had moved in alongside it, because by day 7, Nadia had heard enough. She had heard Julian tell the attending physician in the corridor just outside her open door to do whatever keeps her comfortable, because they were not expecting recovery. She had heard him cancel the specialist that Solomon had arranged and replace him with a hospital-assigned neurologist who did not know her history, her baseline, or any of the contextual information that would have been critical to an accurate diagnosis. She had heard him, on day 9, sitting 2 feet from her bed, discussing honeymoon destinations on a phone call he had clearly forgotten to step out for. She had heard the name Isolde, spoken in a tone that people reserve for things they have already claimed. And she had heard, once, briefly, a woman's voice that was not a nurse's voice, precise and unhurried, and completely without feeling. Do not delay. The Bramwell Gala is in 30 days. Inside her locked body, Nadia Amara Ferris did not cry. She started planning. Now, if this story has you gripping your seat right now, I need you to pause for just 1 second and drop the words "still watching" in the comments section below. Let us see who is truly here for every moment of this, because what comes next is where this story shifts from heartbreaking to something else entirely. Drop your comment. And if you have not subscribed yet, right now is the moment. We are just getting started. Solomon Vrate had been redirected away from Nadia's care on day 2. Julian had done it politely, which was how Julian did everything that served his interests. He had approached the hospital's patient relations team and cited a desire to keep Nadia's treatment circle small and objective, suggesting that personal relationships could complicate clinical decision-making. It was reasonable sounding, it was precisely crafted, and it worked, because Julian was very good at making things that served him sound like they were in service of someone else. Solomon had walked away from the hospital that afternoon because there was nothing else he could legally do. He spent 48 hours feeling progressively wrong about it, in the specific way that people feel wrong when a pattern they know well suddenly stops making sense. He had worked alongside Nadia for 9 years. He knew the architecture of how she thought. He knew what she had built and how she had built it, and why she had built it the way she had. And the picture being assembled around her, the canceled specialist, Julian's sudden authority over her care, the quiet efficiency of how everything was being managed, none of it fit the pattern of a husband in grief. It fit the pattern of something else. He returned to Albrecht Memorial on the evening of day 13, he signed in on a visitor's pass. He walked to the 4th floor. He found room 412, and he stepped inside, and he sat in the chair beside her bed, the way old friends sit when the situation is too large for words, and words would be insufficient anyway. He held her hand, not to examine it, not clinically, simply to hold it. He looked at her face for a long time. The machines maintained their rhythm. The room was very still. Then he spoke, quietly, barely above a breath. He said, "I know you are in there, Nadia. I have known you too long to believe otherwise." He watched her face, and then, so small it could have been a reflex, so brief it could have been dismissed by anyone who was not paying exactly the right kind of attention. Her left index finger moved. Once, twice. Solomon Vrait did not react visibly. He had known Nadia long enough to understand that visible reactions are for people who have not yet learned the strategic value of stillness. He leaned slightly closer. He kept his voice completely even. "If you can hear me, do it again." 3 movements, deliberate, spaced, unmistakable. He sat back. He looked at the ceiling for exactly 3 seconds. Then he reached into his coat pocket and removed his phone, and he began to do what he had come here to do. He documented everything, the chart discrepancies, the canceled specialist, and the date of the cancellation, the name of the hospital assigned neurologist, and the absence of any locked-in protocol assessment in her file, the maintenance log note, flagged and then inexplicably cleared, about a tampered power connection in room 412. He photographed everything with the quiet efficiency of a man who has spent 9 years working beside someone who taught him to always document. Then he leaned close to her ear. He said, "I am going to get you out of here, but we have to be very careful. He cannot know anything." Her finger moved once. She understood. "Before we continue, let us pause here for something important, because this story is not just drama. It carries real information that you, or someone you love, may one day need." Locked-in syndrome, known clinically as pseudocoma, is a neurological condition resulting from damage to specific pathways in the brainstem. It is not a coma. The person inside is fully awake and aware. They can typically move their eyes vertically or blink, and in some cases develop limited voluntary movement in other small muscle groups over time, with proper intervention. What makes locked-in syndrome particularly devastating from a medical standpoint is how frequently it is misread as a persistent vegetative state, a condition in which there is no conscious awareness at all. The difference in treatment between these 2 diagnoses is enormous, and the difference in outcome can be everything. Documented cases exist of locked-in patients who were treated as vegetative for extended periods before a clinician noticed an eye movement or a finger response and correctly reassessed. There are also cases where life support was withdrawn before that reassessment could occur. This is why proper specialist evaluation matters. This is why second opinions matter. This is why the person in that bed deserves the full application of current diagnostic protocol, not a general assessment from a physician who does not know their history. From a legal standpoint, what Julian did, deliberately moving toward the life support equipment in that room with intent to cause death, falls under what legal scholars classify as attempted murder by omission. In law, omission-based liability applies when a person has a recognized duty of care toward another, deliberately withdraws or interferes with that care, and intends a lethal outcome to result. When that deliberate act is documented, as it was here, on facility security footage, combined with evidence of premeditation in the form of text messages, fraudulent document preparation, and unauthorized asset transfers, the legal case that can be constructed is not merely strong, it is airtight. Now, let us talk about what Julian was building while Nadia lay silent. He moved quickly, which told Solomon everything about how long he had been thinking about this before the aneurysm gave him the opportunity. Within the first week of her admission, Julian had begun initiating quiet transfers from their joint accounts into a financial structure he controlled independently. He had contacted an estate attorney, not Nadia's firm, a separate practice entirely, about the enforceability of a personal will Nadia had filed early in the marriage, before Osei Meridian had fully matured, before she had restructured everything under the holding network. That will named Julian as the primary beneficiary of a personal account that represented, to anyone who did not know about Osei Meridian, the apparent sum of what Nadia owned. Julian did not know about Osei Meridian. He had never known about Jose Meridian, and he was moving with the confidence of a man who believed he understood the full picture. He did not understand the full picture. He understood approximately 4% of the full picture. On day 15, the Bramwell-Ferris engagement was announced in the society pages. Julian had moved with a speed that would have been impressive if it were not so revealing. The Bramwell Estate Chapel was booked for a ceremony 6 weeks from the date of Nadia's collapse. The guest list was a directory of the city's most significant families. Society photographers had already been commissioned. Julian visited the ICU less frequently as the weeks progressed. When he did appear, his conversations with the staff revolved increasingly around practical arrangements, timelines, insurance policy language, and what he described with impressive composure as the emotional difficulty of prolonged uncertainty. On day 11, he had entered room 412 alone. He had checked the corridor. He had walked to the wall panel. He had reached for the primary power connection. The backup generator system, installed as a standard safety protocol in every room of a privately owned medical facility that Nadia's holding network had built to specific specifications, had engaged automatically before the disconnect could complete. Julian had not known about the generator system. He also had not known about the security camera positioned above the wall panel, the footage from which was now part of a sealed evidence file being assembled by a team of people who reported, ultimately, to Solomon Vrate. The transfer from Albrecht Memorial happened on a Wednesday. It was documented as a specialist referral to a private neurological recovery facility 40 minutes outside the city, selected for its locked-in syndrome intervention research program. A hospital administrator called Julian to inform him of the move. He asked 2 questions. The first was whether this affected the insurance policy terms. The second was whether the transfer changed anything about the prognosis. He did not ask which facility. He did not ask to accompany her. He sent a message to Isolde that said, "Things are moving. Proceed with the venue confirmation." What Julian did not know was that the private neurological facility was one of 4 medical buildings within a healthcare trust called Meridian Restorative Partners. What he did not know was that Meridian Restorative Partners was a wholly owned subsidiary of a group called Jose Meridian Health. What he did not know, what almost no one in his world knew, because Nadia had spent years ensuring they would not, was that Jose Meridian Health belonged entirely to his wife. Nadia was taken to a facility where every face on the staff had been quietly verified by Solomon's security team. She was treated by a neurological specialist who had been working on locked-in intervention protocols for over a decade, and who, upon reviewing her scans, said quietly to Solomon, "The cognitive engagement here is extraordinary. She has been doing something in there. She had been doing something in there." Recovery from locked-in syndrome, when caused by certain forms of neurological trauma rather than permanent structural damage, can progress significantly with correct and aggressive intervention. It does not happen all at once. It happens the way a tide comes in, incrementally, almost invisibly, until you look up and realize the shoreline has completely changed. A finger first, then a hand, then the slow, extraordinary reclamation of an arm. Speech came back in fragments before it came back in sentences. Single words at first, then short phrases, then full thoughts delivered in a voice that was quieter than it had been but no less precise. She cried once, alone, at 3 a.m, in the 3rd week of her recovery, when she was able to turn her own head toward the window without assistance and see the city lights scattered across the dark like a scattered constellation. She looked at those lights for a long time. Then she stopped crying and asked Solomon, through the eye-tracking interface she was still using at that point, for the status update on every open item. He read the list to her. She listened without interrupting. Then she began to direct. From her recovery bed, first through the eye-tracking device and then through her own returning voice, Nadia coordinated what was simultaneously a financial investigation, a legal strategy, and a criminal evidence-gathering operation of a complexity that most law firms would have needed a full task force to manage. She confirmed every piece of Julian's scheme through her own intelligence channels. She verified the fraudulent will preparation and identified the outside attorney responsible. She mapped the full scope of the asset transfers. She learned the exact date of the Bramwell-Ferris wedding and noted that it fell 38 days from the day she had collapsed in the parking structure. And she confirmed something she had put in motion 8 months before the aneurysm ever happened. Because Nadia, who had spent a decade building structures that no one could see until she chose to show them, had noticed Julian's behavioral shift long before he met Isolde at that gala. She had noticed it, and she had done what she always did when a variable in her environment began to show signs of instability. She had taken a quiet precaution. Agent Petra Dowd of the city's Financial Crimes and Fraud Division was one of the most decorated undercover operatives in the department's recent history. She had been embedded in Julian's social circle, operating under a constructed identity connected to a peripheral Bramwell family acquaintance for 8 months. She had been placed there at Nadia's quiet request, through a legal and law enforcement consultation that Solomon had arranged, after Nadia had provided sufficient preliminary evidence of Julian's financial behavior to justify the investigation. The constructed persona of Isolde Bramwell, the woman Julian believed he was marrying, the woman whose family name he believed was his ticket to every door that had ever been closed to him, was entirely Agent Dowd's creation. Every conversation, every text message, every evening in the back of hired cars discussing timelines, all of it documented, all of it preserved. The trap had been set for months. Julian had walked into it believing he was the one doing the trapping. If you are still with us right now, and this story has you completely locked in, I need you to do one thing before this next part begins. Drop the words "She planned this" in the comments right now, because what you are about to witness is not just justice. It is one of the most precise and complete reversals you will ever hear. Make sure you are subscribed so you never miss a story like this one on Mr. Black Love Drama TV. And now, let us go to the Bramwell Estate Chapel. The Bramwell Estate Chapel was 400 years old. It sat on 12 acres of private land outside the city, stone-walled and ivy-covered, with arched windows that caught the morning light and scattered it across the interior in patterns that had made photographers line up for access, regardless of what event was taking place inside. The Bramwell family had used it for every significant ceremony in 4 generations. Its inclusion in this wedding was not incidental. It was a statement about arrival, about legacy, about the particular kind of belonging that Julian Ferris had spent his entire adult life trying to purchase. The guest list read like a social register of consequence: judges, commissioners, families whose names appeared on hospital wings and university buildings, people whose presence at an event confers a kind of institutional legitimacy simply by virtue of their attendance. Julian had curated the room carefully. He wanted witnesses. He wanted the moment of his arrival to be seen by the exact people whose recognition had always mattered most to him. He stood at the altar in a pale gray morning suit, bespoke, fitted with the precision that costs more than most people's monthly rent. His expression was composed. His posture radiated the specific confidence of a man who believes he has solved every variable and is now simply waiting for the outcome he has engineered. He had called the hospital that morning. He had received confirmation that Nadia's condition remained, as documented, unchanged. He had reminded himself, for what he had decided would be the last time, that he had simply been practical, that he had made the only rational choice available to a man in his position. Agent Petra Dowd, operating as Isolde Bramwell for the final time, walked the aisle in a white gown that had been chosen to make photographs well. She carried white orchids. Her composure was complete and professional. She reached the altar. Julian took her hand. They looked at each other with the look of two people who share a secret, who believe they have gotten away with something, who are standing at what they believe is the beginning of everything. The officiant opened his book. "We are gathered here today." At 11:04 in the morning, Julian's primary bank account was frozen. At 11:06, his secondary account followed. At 11:09, the shell company structure he had registered 6 months earlier under a property management firm's name was frozen. Then the joint account he had restructured using Nadia's transferred assets, frozen. The offshore holding he believed was invisible, frozen. Every financial channel he had prepared for the life that was supposed to begin today, systematically and simultaneously closed. His phone began to vibrate inside his jacket pocket at 11:07. His lawyer called first, then his accountant, then 3 numbers he did not recognize, then his lawyer again. He felt the vibrations and ignored them, because he was 40 seconds away from being married to a Bramwell, and once that happened, he believed, none of the rest of it would matter. The officiant reached the pause that every wedding ceremony arrives at, the breath before the binding words, the formal moment of invitation that is, in most ceremonies, a formality. If anyone here has cause to object to this union, speak now. The chapel doors opened. She did not rush. Nadia Amara Ferris walked through the doors of the Bramwell Estate Chapel the way she had always walked into rooms that mattered, without performance, without haste, with the absolute, unshakable stillness of a person who has already resolved every variable and is simply allowing everyone else the courtesy of catching up. She was thinner than she had been 6 weeks ago. There was evidence of the recovery in the slight deliberateness of each step, the particular care of a body that has recently relearned what movement costs. But her posture was iron, her chin was level, and her eyes, the eyes that had been the only part of her that could move for the first 2 weeks of her captivity inside her own body, were clear and focused and entirely without doubt. She wore ivory, not a gown, not a wedding dress, a suit, structured, precisely cut, unapologetically powerful in the way that clothes are powerful when they are chosen not to impress but to declare. At the lapel, a single brooch, an heirloom piece that had belonged to her grandmother, that she had worn on the day she signed the papers that made Osei Meridian real. A column of small diamonds along the neckline caught the chapel's arched light and scattered it across the stone walls like thrown stars. Her hair was swept back. Her hands were still. Beside her walked Solomon Vrate, carrying a sealed document portfolio. Behind him, 2 officers from the Financial Crimes and Fraud Division in plain clothes. Behind those, 3 members of her legal team, each holding a separate component of the case that had been 43 days in construction and 6 weeks in its final assembly. The chapel did not erupt immediately. There was a moment, suspended and complete, in which 400 years of stone walls held their breath, and every person in that room tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Julian's face moved through 4 expressions in the space of 3 seconds. Recognition, incomprehension, the physical flinch of a man whose mind is refusing to accept the input it is receiving, and then the terrible, absolute stillness of a man who has run every possible calculation and found no remaining exit. There were none. "Hello, Julian." Her voice was steady. Not cold, she was past cold. Cold is what you feel when something still has the power to wound you. What Nadia spoke in that moment was something that exists on the other side of cold entirely. The tone of a woman who had spent 43 days holding her entire strategy inside a locked body, who had planned this moment from a bed inside a room she owned in a facility she owned, using a legal team retained by an empire her husband did not know existed, and who had never, not for a single moment across all of those days, lost her nerve. "I believe I have the floor." She walked to the center of the aisle. She turned to face the congregation. "My name is Nadia Amara Ferris. Some of you may know the Osei Meridian Group without knowing that it belongs to me. Some of you may be aware of the Meridian Restorative Healthcare Trust without knowing that it is a subsidiary of my holdings. Some of you may know that there is a majority shareholder in Bramwell Textiles who has never appeared on any public document connected to this family's company, and that majority shareholder is currently standing in front of you." She let that land. She turned briefly toward the altar, toward the woman in the white gown, holding the orchids. The woman standing at that altar is not a member of the Bramwell family. She is Agent Petra Dowd of the city's Financial Crimes and Fraud Division. She was placed in my husband's life 8 months ago to confirm what I already had reason to suspect about his intentions toward our marriage and toward my life. Agent Dowd reached into her bouquet. She produced her badge with the same composure she had brought to every moment of the previous 8 months. Solomon stepped forward. He opened the portfolio. 43 days of documented evidence. The tampered power connection in room 412 of Albrecht Memorial Hospital. The security footage from the camera above the wall panel on day 11. The canceled specialist and the documented timeline of that cancellation. The fraudulent will preparation and the name of the outside attorney engaged to produce it. The full map of the unauthorized asset transfers. And the text message record between Julian Ferris and a phone registered to the same number Agent Dowd had been operating under. A record that contained enough premeditation to establish conspiracy beyond any reasonable legal threshold. "Julian Ferris," said the officer stepping forward, his voice carrying the flat, practiced authority of someone who has done this before and will do it again. "You are under arrest for attempted murder by omission, conspiracy to commit financial fraud, fraudulent preparation of a legal will, unauthorized transfer of marital assets, and criminal interference with medical life support equipment." Julian said nothing. His hand was on the altar railing. The pale gray morning suit, chosen for the first day of the life he had engineered, the life he had built on the foundation of a woman he had left for silent, and told himself was already gone, was now the outfit he would be photographed in on the front page of every publication in the city. By the following morning, the officers moved toward him, and Nadia watched, not with rage, not with grief. She had felt both of those things. She had felt them in full across 43 days of silence, and they had burned through her and left behind something cleaner and more permanent. She watched with the quiet, complete satisfaction of a woman who had held her strategy together inside a locked body for over a month and had delivered exactly the ending she had designed. The room was still processing, and Nadia turned once more to face the congregation, to give them the image that would circulate on every platform before the chapel had fully emptied. An unguarded moment captured by someone in the third row, a photograph that was not posed and not perfect, and that was, for exactly those reasons, completely unforgettable. A woman in ivory at the center of a 400-year-old chapel, the morning light through the arched windows falling across her as though the building itself understood what it was participating in, not smiling, simply standing, present, returned, completely herself. Julian was processed before the reception dinner would have been served. Every account he had prepared for the life that was supposed to begin that day remained frozen for the duration of a criminal investigation that would take nearly 2 years to fully resolve. He was held in custody through the first month of that process while the legal case was assembled and filed. Every layer of the scheme, the fraudulent documents, the asset transfers, the interference with her medical care, was methodically disassembled and presented in public proceedings for the record. The evidence was, as Nadia's lead attorney noted in a statement afterward, the most comprehensively documented case of marital financial fraud and attempted medical murder she had seen in 22 years of practice. The Bramwell family released a statement expressing their full support for the judicial process. They also contacted Solomon Vrate within the week about the majority stake Nadia held in their textile company. She kept it. She did not negotiate. She kept it, and she moved on to the next item on her list. Agent Petra Dowd returned to the Financial Crimes Division and was quietly commended for what her supervising officer described as an 8-month performance of extraordinary discipline and precision. The neurologist who had led Nadia's recovery at Meridian Restorative published an anonymized case study of her treatment protocol that became a reference document in locked-in syndrome diagnostic discussions across 3 countries. The Bramwell Estate Chapel, once the proceedings were complete, was converted into a cultural event space whose proceeds fund a neurological awareness foundation focused specifically on locked-in syndrome misdiagnosis advocacy and patient rights. Solomon Vrate became the foundation's first board chair. Nadia returned to Ose Meridian, not the same woman who had stepped away from it in the parking structure on a Wednesday afternoon, but a sharper and more certain version of that woman, one who had survived something that most people do not survive, and who had emerged from it with nothing softened and nothing lost that had been worth keeping. She gave one interview, her first ever. She gave it to a journalist she had known for years and trusted for the same amount of time. At the end of the conversation, the journalist asked her what she would want people to take from this story if they could only take one thing. Nadia thought about it for a moment. Then she said, "Know who you are before anyone else gets the chance to decide for you." And now, before we close, there are things this story is trying to tell us that go beyond the drama, beyond the courtroom, beyond the chapel and the ivory suit and the badge produced from a bouquet of white orchids. Because great stories are not just entertainment, they are mirrors. And this one holds up several worth looking into directly. The first is this: underestimating someone is always a choice, and it is always a risk. Julian looked at Nadia's quietness and saw limitation. He looked at her modest car and her uncomplicated apartment and her warmth and her softness, and he built an entire narrative about who she was from those surface details, and that narrative had no room in it for an invisible empire or a decade of disciplined building, or a mind that could plan its own survival from inside a locked body. He made the most expensive mistake available to him, which is the mistake of believing that what you can see is all there is. The second is harder. Love is not the same as attention. Nadia confused Julian's attentiveness for love, and that confusion cost her years and nearly cost her everything. Attention is a skill. Some people are very skilled at it. Love is a daily, repeated choice to prioritize someone else's well-being alongside your own, and it cannot be faked across a long enough timeline. The difference between those two things is something worth knowing before you make permanent decisions based on temporary evidence. The third is the one that lives in the 43 days of silence. Your stillness is not your weakness. Nadia planned an empire from inside a body that had stopped responding to her. She held a complete legal and financial strategy together without being able to speak a word of it, without being able to write a single note, using nothing but the roaring fire of her own mind in a locked glass case. She never panicked. She never surrendered. She did not need to be loud to be formidable. Your quiet is not your defeat. Sometimes it is your greatest advantage. The fourth is about Solomon. Build genuinely, and the right people will find you. Solomon came back to that hospital not because he was paid to, not because it was his professional obligation, but because 9 years of real relationship had given him the ability to recognize when something was wrong, even when the surface said everything was fine. He came back because Nadia had lived with integrity long enough that the people who mattered knew exactly who she was. That kind of loyalty cannot be purchased. It can only be earned over time, and it is worth more than any structure or strategy or holding company in the world. And the fifth is the simplest. Justice, when it is well prepared, when it is patient, when it is built on documentation and discipline and the refusal to be rushed, does not arrive quietly. It arrives completely. That is what Nadia built in those 43 days, not revenge, a complete reckoning. And the difference between those two things is everything. We have reached the end of today's story on Mr. Black Love Drama TV, and if you made it here, you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel exists for. I need you to do 3 things right now. First, hit that like button because it tells the algorithm this story deserves to be seen by more people, and it does. Second, leave a comment below and tell us which moment in this story hit you the hardest. Was it the chapel? Was it Solomon coming back with a visitor's badge? Was it Nadia crying at 3 in the morning and then asking for the status update? Tell us. We read every single comment. And third, if you are not already subscribed to Mr. Black Love Drama TV, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Because next time, we have a story about a man who spent 12 years building a life for a woman who never intended to stay, and the moment he discovered what she had actually been building the entire time. You do not want to arrive late to that one. This has been Mr. Black Love Drama TV. Stay strong, stay discerning, and never, ever let anyone convince you that your quiet is your weakness. We will see you in the next one.